Hi, everyone. This is Trip Jennings. I'm the executive director with New Mexico in Depth. I'm joined by Marjorie Childress, who is our managing editor. It is Monday, October 28th. We've got about a week before Election Day. We thought we'd get on Zoom and just kind of um, sort of talk about certain items and record our thoughts of where we are about a week out from the election. Let me start out with some basics, if I can, Marjorie, just real quick, just by
Sure.
saying that the early vote looks pretty good this year. We're at about 30% of 1.3 million or so voters who have already cast their votes. 60% was the high for early vote in 2016. I would assume we're probably going to hit maybe 40, 45% with a week to go. We've got through Saturday. I think November 2nd is the last day of early voting. So this is a really interesting time. So I just wanted to touch on real quick. I know I'm talking a lot. I'll stop in a second. Just wanted to outline stuff. We're going to touch on state house races real quick. Money in politics as it's flowing, the money and how it's flowing through the system right now. Marjorie's going to do a lot of the talking there. Then we're going to move into former President Trump coming to Albuquerque on Thursday, which is a natural segue into Congressional District 2, which is one of the hottest races in the nation. Gabe Vasquez, the incumbent, pitted against Yvette Herald, who actually he beat 2 years ago. She was the Republican incumbent. Then we're going to move to the U.S. Senate race. And then we'll widen the lens out on the national context. We'll try to do this in the next 15, 20 minutes. We'll see if we're able to do that. Marjorie, you'll keep me from talking too much, right?
No, not at all.
So yeah, tell us about some of the state house races.
Oh, okay. Well, I should say I think what we all know is that the Democrats aren't in danger of losing their very dominant position at the state house. I mean, it's the definitely the Democrats that have nothing to fear about being able to pass an agenda at the state house. And the question is always their internal politics, right? Like kind of their internal, can they get agreement on what their agenda is internally?
Progressive versus more moderate kind of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
And so there are some hot races. There's a few hot races this year. There's a handful that, I find that people who really watch politics will find really interesting. And one of those is down south, and it kind of reflects that internal division within the Democratic Party. It's a House district that was held by a Democrat who got primaried it's House District 52 in the Las Cruces in Otero County. And Willie Madrid, a Democrat,
Mm.
lost the primary to a physician named John Hill. And it's a very close district between Democrats and Republicans. And I remember in the spring when we did some reporting, and I wrote a newsletter and just kind of outlining kind of the hot races I was watching. And I didn't put this race on it, which I guess was a mistake on my part. And John Hill sent me a note, and he said, just wait." And I was like, "Okay." And sure enough, he beat him. He won the
He
election. And
beat Willie Madrid, who had been in
yes.
the state house for a while.
Hmm. And he won the election, and he's kind of he was backed by the progressive wing. And then sadly, and so I replied to him, I said, "You will definitely be, this race will definitely be on my hot list in the general, because of the district. It's a contested district." And then sadly he passed away in the
Right,
summer, which I thought was
right.
sad, because his kind of passion for running in the election really jumped out at me in the email. And so kind of late in the game, a well-known community member, Sarah Silva, was nominated to replace him, and she's on the ballot. But she's a well-known progressive advocate and person in Las Cruces. So it's just it's going to be a really interesting.
And so who is she running against?
She's running against Republican Elizabeth Winterroud, who
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
who almost won the seat in the previous cycle. So
Mm.
it's not like Willie Madrid was able to just real easily win his general election races.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
And for those of you guys who may not know, state house races are come up every 2 years. State Senate
Mhm.
races are every 4 years. So
Right.
Willie Madrid barely beat the Republican opponent 2 years ago, and then lost to John Hill during the primary this
Mhm.
year. Yeah.
So it's interesting. It's interesting on when it comes to these things that we talk about sometimes in the primary elections, where Democrats primary Democrats, and when progressives primary Democrats, it's almost like in some of these districts they're willing to sacrifice the district almost. I mean, I'm not saying it's not like a really competitive race. It is, and I think Sarah Silva probably has a really great chance of winning. But at the same time, there's a calculus there that comes into play around it, which I just find interesting to watch. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how this one plays out.
So you have talked about some of the races, and we have done a lot of reporting around, the flow of money in politics this
Mhm.
cycle. There is a particular race that's south of Albuquerque by a couple of hours that is involves a former Republican lawmaker who is trying to come back to the legislature, win the seat. I'm talking about Rebecca Dow, and then she's running against the Democrat Tara. Uh, is it uh,
Jaramillo.
Jaramillo?
Mhm.
And the thing that struck me as you were telling me about it was the amount of money that they have raised in this
Mhm.
race,
Yeah,
which are is
between the two
eye-popping.
of them, it's almost $800,000.
Total, like almost 400,000 for one and almost
Mhm.
400,000 for the,
Mhm.
the other, right? Which is that's a lot of money for a state
Yeah.
house race.
That is a lot of money. And I mean, when I look at so Rebecca Dow, who's topped 400,000, and Jaramillo, who's reaching 400,000. And I look at other candidates in some of the tight races. There's like a handful of really tight races, other ones as well. There's a lot of these candidates who are raising a lot of money. I mean, and I just recall these races being so expensive in the past. It's like become
Yeah,
like a new normal, I think, almost.
yeah. You and I were talking before the call about when certain Democratic leaders were challenged by the Republican governor about 10 years ago, 8, 10, 12 years ago. It was 8, yeah. It would have been 2016, so 8 years ago. Those Senate races were pretty expensive and they were eye-popping. But the race we just described in the Rebecca Dow, Tara Jaramillo race, um, that's like a ton of money.
That's a lot of money for a New Mexico House seat, I
House
think.
seat, yes. Are there
Uh,
any other races that are on your radar at the state house or state senate?
um,
Um,
Well, I mean, I mean, I'm definitely, I just want to say one thing about the Dow Jaramillo race. Another other thing that makes that really interesting is just to see if Dow can come back and win her seat back, because she was always such a big personality. I think she has a ton of name recognition
she ran for
in
governor
that
on
area.
the
Yeah.
Republican side, and yeah.
And she's always been a very vocal person, well represented in media, including our own. I mean,
She
and
and she understands certain like policies. I
Mhm.
mean, yeah, totally.
It's
Yeah, yeah,
almost like an incumbent running against an incumbent. And that if
yeah,
you look
yeah,
at our political
yeah.
head, it's like we always say incumbents are hard to beat. Well, it's in this case, I think Tara Jaramillo has had a real challenge, and it's going to be really interesting to see the outcome of that race.
Okay, so you just naturally gave us a segue to jump into the federal races.
Okay.
Nope, you did because you mentioned like it's almost like an incumbent running against an incumbent.
Mhm.
We have that happening in Congressional District 2 right now, which is
Yes.
Gabe Vasquez, who's the Democrat, been in there for one term. He's trying to keep his seat from Yvette Herald, who he beat in 2022. It is a really competitive race. I believe Cook Political Report has it as a toss-up. Cook,
Mm-hmm.
for those guys who don't maybe know or not, political junkies, Cook Political Report is one of those, rating agencies as far as politics goes that everybody checks. And then, basically we had the journal poll come out and show that, Gabe Vasquez is leading by 4 points, but that's within the margin of error. So we get word this week or over the weekend that former President Trump is dropping into Albuquerque on Thursday. And I have
Mm-hmm.
to think that's partly to do with Congressional District 2 race.
Probably. I think it must have something to do with CD2, but also I was reading some interesting analysis around uh, well, I mean, for that Kamala Harris rallied in Houston. Trump
Good
is not
point.
in New
Fair
York, Trump
point.
coming to the Albuquerque Sun Point, maybe to get to kind of signal to Hispanics
Yes,
he is with them. I mean, that there,
exactly.
and what I was, and this is like an interesting little tidbit it was interesting analysis that I was reading, that more and more at the national level, national candidates are trying to really get the viral sound bites, the viral national social media landscape. And it's these sorts of events that will help them do that. And that really makes a lot of sense to me. So it's a dash. She's going to stop in, rally at the Sunport, and move on to a battleground state.
Yeah, yeah. And in some ways it is like what I think Kamala Harris did in Houston, which is like, I'm taking it to what we think is a red state.
Mm.
Trump is coming in and saying, I'm going to take it to a blue state. I agree with what you said about, I'm with you Hispanics, but it's also, I'm, yeah, I'm playing a base strategy here, but I'm also going to take it to the blue state. Or like she did, Harris took it to Houston, which is I'm going to take it
Mhm.
to the red state. We're not afraid to go into enemy territory. In other words, I'm sorry
Right.
to use that.
Well, and also, Texas does have a really competitive Senate race on its hands.
Oh, yeah, I'm not sure what the point
I
spread
don't
is
know
on
what
that.
the spread is. I haven't looked at it, but I pay a little attention to it because I'm from there and from the state. There's probably some kind of calculus there too, just like we have our tight House Congress.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Colin Allred, who is a Democratic congressman, is running to unseat Republican incumbent Ted Cruz in that Senate race. So, yeah, I think you're right. I think that's probably what Kamala Harris was doing, was like, galvanizing the vote, which is probably what Trump is the former president's going to do in the CD2, also signaling, so very tight race in CD2. Can we turn to the U.S. Senate race real quick here in the state?
Well, I think we should just real briefly talk about CD2 a little bit more. I mean,
Okay.
I think that what I find interesting that I just think people should consider is redistricting really impacted it really impacted the shape of that district, and it moved from being a district that was considered a Republican stronghold, except for occasionally in presidential election years when more people vote, a Democrat had a chance of winning. And a lot of that had to do with more Las Crucens would come out and vote in presidential elections. And so we would see these candidates here and there come out and win. And then Harrell, she was a Republican. She held that seat at one point. And now after redistricting, in 2022 was the first year they had a race after the new map. Under the new map, some of Albuquerque's in that district. Some of northwestern part of the state is in that
Yeah. The
district.
South Valley of Albuquerque is in that
Yeah.
district now.
And
Yeah.
so then
It's
we
really
have,
interesting.
in a non-presidential year, which is normally a year that Republicans would be a slam dunk in the old CD2, Gabe Vasquez was able to win in 2022. And it wasn't by much. It was a squeaker. Like, I think it was 1,300 votes. So
It,
a little
it,
over.
it, it was small. I mean, I also want to say that, there was, for the longest time, Marjorie, you're right. It was a Republican stronghold, except for that moment when Steve Pierce ran for, was it, I can't remember, it was a statewide race for Senate, 2008 or whatever it was, and lost. And so the Democrat won that district, Harry Teague.
Mhm.
And then Steve Pierce, basically ran again and captured the seat again. And then we had, you're right, it is a Republican stronghold until 2018. And so she told us small, which was a really weird year nationally, as you may recall. She was able to
Mhm.
beat, I believe it was Yvette Herrell,
Mhm.
as I recall, and then Yvette Herrell ran again in 2020 and beat Sochi Torres Small in
Mhm.
2020. There's a little history here is just how much this
Yeah.
district has changed hands. Um,
Yeah,
and
no, it's fascinating. And so it's going to be interesting to see, how, to me, what's going to be interesting to see is if that margin grows in a presidential.
yes, I'm
Um,
with you. I think that is the race that we're all watching.
and Harold, I mean, in some ways, she reflects the makeup of the kind of candidate Republicans might effectively put forward for that district before redistricting. I mean, I think the abortion debate is a really good example. I mean, she's trying to run away now from past statements that she's made on abortion in New
Right.
Mexico, because in New Mexico, it's not a winning message for her. And we
Right.
and she's on, there's like statements she's made in the past that she wished she could ban abortion entirely in New Mexico. And so, going forward, we'll see if she's able to pull it out and convince voters that she's moderated, that she doesn't really believe that, which she says that she wouldn't vote for a national abortion ban. But that's not a it's like candidates trying to outrun the past statements, make you wonder, well, were they pandering back then, or are they pandering now? I mean, it's an interesting kind of question to reflect on with candidates, and it's a good example of how political winds change and political
Well,
change.
I mean, or are they growing as people? Usually, in my experience, it may be actually more of, trying to win votes, you
Well, I
know?
mean, in New Mexico, with the winds, the political winds are abortion is a hugely consequential question for
Yes.
voters. And, Yvette Harrell has passed statements that are going to hurt her around
Hmm.
wanting to have a complete abortion ban. And in the US Senate race, with Nella Domenici challenging Martin Heinrich, which the polling shows that he is comfortably in the lead. And I mean, I don't know if abortion has anything to do with that, but I think Democrats have been very effectively able to hammer her on abortion because by the sheer fact that she is a Republican, not because she has a record on
Right.
abortion, just the sheer fact that she's a Republican. I think, Democrats have been able to say, look, vote for her. You're voting for a Senate Republican majority that will push a national abortion ban. And she's been righteously upset about that.
Yeah, yeah, and you know what? It's really very interesting. I mean, I want to go back to CD2 real quick because Gabe Vasquez is just hammering Yvette Herrell on this thing, and that's the message. And I think probably the sitting U.S. senator is doing the same thing to Nella Domenici. That's a winning message nationally for Democrats. It seems like. The thing I want to say about Nella Domenici, I do not know her, but I did know her father, who was Pete Domenici, who was really well respected and was kind of like old school Republican. So it's been very interesting to see how she has at the beginning tried to run on, basically, I am the daughter of this Republican who used to work across the aisle. He worked with Jeff Bingaman. He was the budget, the Senate budget, the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee. He really understood a lot of stuff. Um, and she may be actually exactly the type of Republican her father was, but the political context has changed since then. I
Mhm.
mean that's the game is different
Well,
in
the argument
Washington.
that Heinrich and the Democrats make is that it doesn't even matter what you say. Um, what matters is the people, and this is something he said in the first debate, is that a win for her, she would vote for leaders to run the Senate who have all said that they're interested in a national abortion ban. And I mean, it's almost like this systemic thing that they're pointing out is like, vote for her means this whole crowd wins the day. And I
Yeah.
mean, polling shows that Republicans likely will win the Senate. But then you get into questions around the margin and whatnot. But I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
But
It-
yeah, he's not been able to
it-
outrun just her Republican. On this
well,
issue, just the fact that she's a Republican.
it is so it's interesting because we New Mexico in depth we cover mostly state houses, but we are somewhat familiar with Congress because of friends who've covered Congress, or we just read a lot of stuff. And it's totally different. There's a little more you have a little more freedom in state houses to vote your conscience on certain issues. In Congress, that's not as much the case, actually. It's on some issues. It used to be maybe you had more freedom, but it is so polarized these days that it's harder, I think, for people to go in. I'm not saying anything about Nella Domenici here. I'm just saying that it is
Right.
difficult. It is
I
difficult.
mean, I mean, at the end of the day, were she able to win, which polling doesn't show that she is anywhere near winning, she might end up in that small set of Republican women who might hold the line on a national abortion ban. We don't know.
Yeah, we just don't know because it is really hard to do it, but there are people on
Mhm.
both sides of the aisle who have been able to hold out on
Yeah.
against the Democratic consensus or the Republican consensus
Mhm.
on both sides. So, yes, an extraordinarily interesting, even though it doesn't seem to be as competitive as CD2, Congressional District 2, it's still an interesting race. I think we're getting close to the end of our call, but I do think we should just, widen the lens just to talk about the national context. It is, as I said, Monday, October 28th. And one thing that Marjorie and I both we pay attention to the the scene as well as the state scene. And I think both of us have been really struck by some of the rhetoric by Donald Trump and around his use of the enemy within,
Mhm.
which is something that he has increasingly talked about on the campaign trail. And it is something that I think we should maybe talk about for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, no, totally.
I mean, would you like to start, or I can?
Um, I mean, there's just so much to like say about it. I mean,
Yeah.
I the concept of the enemy within is and the language that most recently one of his surrogates, Tucker Carlson, said at a rally, he called Democrats the most parasitic, useless, violent, nasty, aggressive people in your country. They have no legitimacy in a democracy. This is a very broad and sweeping statement about the opposing political party. Um, which seems to me like then you add in the enemy within, that's kind of it's setting up this idea. It sets up this idea. It's an idea they're pushing that there are some Americans who are just not legitimate. They don't belong in our democracy. And it harkens back to really dark histories in our country. And in particular, I'm thinking about, um, the mid 20th century when we had McCarthyism, the hunting down of people who back then were considered communists and organizations that were put on lists and blacklists, people who couldn't get jobs and loyalty oaths, those sorts of things. And it just feels like, you know, it just feels like a dark and scary moment when you start hearing that kind of rhetoric.
I would agree, and the way I often talk about it with friends is I've been paying attention to presidential races for 40 years, and I have never heard this rhetoric to the degree that I've heard it on this campaign trail. I mean, there was 2016 and 2020, but this rhetoric seems to be very pronounced, and even people like John Kelly, who was his, chief of staff, Donald Trump chief of staff for a year and a half, came out recently and told the New York Times that Donald Trump's use of like, I will use the military to go after the enemy within, was really disturbing to him. And that really struck me because I like the combination of that and also the word parasitic by surrogates makes me think that there, yes, it's dark chapters in American history, but there are also dark chapters in other countries as well. And I don't mean just the one that everybody loves to talk point to in Europe. I'm talking about wherever there have been autocrats. Um, it does it should at least give one pause. Let's just say it that way. Um, we're not trying to influence anybody's vote, but it is something that as someone I'll speak for myself as someone who likes to read history and read widely. This is a little I'm a little nervous.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have a lot of, I would say family and people I know who are strong Trump supporters. And I think there's an element of disbelief that any of that is serious, that kind of
Mm-hmm.
out there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I don't think, I mean, I don't think that we can just discount rhetoric. I mean, rhetoric's important. Rhetoric actually influences a lot of people to act. Um, so there's the question of like, does he mean it? Or do they mean what they're saying? Is this just to rouse up a really fervent sector of their base to get them out to vote, or is it serious? Well, I mean, regardless, I think rhetoric is important because it leads to outcomes. It leads to some people acting out, at the very least, that's what it does. So,
Well, I mean, yes, and I would agree with you, and I would say, for those of you who don't know, I talk about this all the time, and on Zooms and maybe appearances on TV. But I am from the Deep South, and as I hear some of this language and stuff, I am reminded of my childhood, of being a white Southerner and hearing certain populations talked about. And to your point, I have friends, not in my immediate family, but friends who are like, he doesn't really mean it. This is just rhetoric. And I think back to that's what people sometimes would say during the 60s and 70s and 80s. And I'm skeptical that this is just rhetoric. I I'm not sure that Trump is the guy who will actually be the guy to say, I'm going to use the military to go after the enemy within. I do wonder if he wins, if there are some people around him who are capable of that. I don't know that he is necessarily, but you never know.
right.
Well, I think on that note,
On that
since we
note,
on that happy note, I think we want to say goodbye and we'll see you guys again when we do
well,
other
at the polls,
Zooms
I mean, election day is next Tuesday on November
next
5th.
Tuesday. Get out and vote. However you're going to vote, get out
Yeah.
and vote. This is important that you use your constitutional right to vote.
Mhm.
And again, however you want to vote, that's cool, but you
And we
should
can
use
say
it.
that there is same-day voter registration in New Mexico. And early voting goes through Saturday. It does not happen on Monday, and then voting day,
Election day.
Tuesday.
And also there is, I believe, same day registration. You can do that on election day as well.
Yes.
So we're up around 9,000 folks who've used the same day registration opportunity. We'll see how many by the end of by next week. We'll see how many people have used that relatively new law in the last is it a couple of years,
Mhm.
right? Yeah. All
Well,
right.
yeah, couple
Hey,
cycles, I would
yeah,
say,
a
but
couple of cycles because it was passed in 2019 and so they had 2020. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Okay, folks, thanks so much. We'll see you guys around.
bye.
Bye-bye.